Well, it's nice to speak with you again, Stuart. Today, I'm looking forward to hearing your views on the topic of the 8 supply chain rules. But before we start, can you provide a brief background of yourself?
Yeah, sure, Dustin. Thank you. I've worked in supply chain really for many, many years now. I used to work in logistics. My background's in logistics, and I did that based in the UK, but also down in West Africa. And then in, well, when was it now? 1990, quite some years ago, I moved into the training education side of things with an institute here in the UK, the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, which of course is an institute very similar to people like Apex and ISM, etc., that you have in the US. And that got me into the education side of things, and subsequent to starting out in 1990, I've been fortunate enough to go to many different countries working. I think it was about 35 the last time we did a count up on it, delivering training programs, all on the supply chain emphasis, although we go into some detail on separate topics like procurement, like warehousing, like inventory, besides just the overview of supply chain. So that's where I come from there, Dustin. So if you like, I'll just carry on now, should I, on how I came to come up with the supply chain rules and what the importance is. Okay.
Please continue.
So what happened in a lot of the travels I was doing and working, that people were starting to ask me just what the supply chain was about, and I thought, well, you know, there's an opportunity here to just sit back and think about what the major aspects of supply chain is. So that forced me really into looking into it and coming up with 8 rules. Now, I'm going to just skip through those very quickly. They not specifically need to be in the importance I'm going to give them, although for reasons that will become clear, the first 2 or 3 probably are in the importance. You know, these are aspects that we must get right, and clearly there's some obvious ones in there that people will recognize, and also some perhaps not so obvious ones. So perhaps it's useful if I just start off with my definition, another's definition really, of supply chain. Supply chain is of course a process, and what it's about trying to do is to integrate and coordinate and control this whole movement of materials, goods and information, which is starting off simply from a supplier, we'll come back to that, from a supplier, through a series of customers until it reaches the final consumer. So you and I are always at the end of a supply chain as consumers. I think the main thing about the definition is that it's a linking process. It's linking all the activities that go on between suppliers and customers to the consumer, and doing that in a timely manner. So supply chain management involving the management of activities like buying and sourcing, manufacturing, making of product, the moving, logistics side if you like, and also the selling side. So there we go. The important bit really, and I think most people know this, it's in the chain name, that all these activities are connected, and out of that you can get the words coming out that really the whole thing is very dependent. It's all dependent on each other, isn't it? So what we need to do is to really recognize that, and I'll be coming on to that one again a bit shortly, because what we find is that although it is all a dependent process, people are managing it independently. They're just not joined up, and because they're not joined up, you can argue then that there's an aspect there where people can maybe fail in managing the supply chain. Okay, so that's the background on supply chain. Let me just go into it now and just run through the rules if I could. The first supply chain rule for me was what I call win the home games first. That's really taken from a sports team analogy, where if you want to be top of the division, top of the league, whatever it is, the priority's got to be, you've got to start to win the home games. You've got to get your internal organization working well. So all internal operations and activities really need to be integrated, coordinated and controlled. Now, this is often where supply chains fail before they've even started, because that just doesn't go on. You start to find that one function is maybe got a role over others. They don't work well together. Internal customers sometimes become internal enemies. We just don't find that the internal operations are working very, very well. It's been nicely also put across by one of our profs here in the UK, who said that what we need is T-shaped people. The T being having people who have got depth in a function, but also that's on the vertical side, and then the T on the horizontal is that they need to join up with the left and the right side of them. So that's a nice way of putting it, really, there, that we just need to get this internal collaboration working well, or rule number one, win the home games first. A very big start for people, organisations, because it's getting into culture, it's getting into changing the way we've done things around here, which is often not very easy often. So there's the rule number one, and I would say definitely the number one rule in supply chain. Number two really goes through into looking at inventory. So rule number two for me is that the format of inventory and where it's held in the supply chain has got to be of interest to all supply chain players. Therefore, it must be something that's jointly examined and investigated. Now, this is done often, of course, with people who are doing processes like CPFR, Collaborative Planning Forecast Requirements, sales and operation planning, by definition, are looking at stock levels, how we hold them, and also are things that are collaborative and incorporated in rule number one. So we can see the real evidence around for actually doing this. And there's a whole bag of worms, of course, once you get into the inventory side. And the net result generally is often, if it's not being managed properly, that throughout the supply chain, more inventory is being held than is actually needed. So too much inventory is being held. I'm thinking of things like the Forrester effect that come into it and illustrate those aspects. So it is something that we need to be looking at very, very closely. Okie dokie, so that's number two. Number three, obviously what we're about is trying to get the right kind, the optimum, if you like, cost and service balance. So the optimum and ideal service cost and service balance will only ever be found by working and collaborating with all the players in the supply chain. So this is taking, if you like, win the home games first on collaboration out into the supply chain and looking at ways of working with people and trying to tap into all the different kind of aspects that come through there. So clearly one that's going to come out from that, I've got it as a rule later on, is reducing lead times and starting to look at that. But to do this, we need to go beyond the actual first tiers and start to look into the network, the supply chain, rather than just looking at, say, first level supply. And this is a big area still for a lot of people, going into suppliers and starting to look at it that way. There are some sad stories, really, where that focus is often brought home when something goes wrong in the supply chain that's perhaps far removed. I'm thinking about things that have gone on, if you like, supply chain risk area, I guess, where there's been problems in factories in third world countries that have been publicized very, very well and had impact on end retail companies there. So it's more than just looking at data and processes here. It's looking at mutual interest and trying to get open relationships. So again, that's quite a big one there. Number four is coming through to the time element. Obviously, all activities taking place in time, so the actual flows, but also the cash flows and the information flows are important. And the big thing on the lead time for us, people often, I find, get this wrong. It's very, very nice if we could get short lead times. Obviously, if we're able to do that, it's going to reduce on the inventory side. But the major aspect is to actually have a reliable lead times. And if lead times are reliable and we know that something is going to happen within that lead time, then we can plan that in. As is often said on inventory, that it's actually uncertainty, it's the mother of inventory. Uncertainty is the mother of inventory. So the length of the lead time is of secondary importance to the variability and uncertainness in lead times. So knowing what the lead times are and spending time working on trying to find a reliable way of maintaining those lead times so that we've got certainty coming through is critically needed, but is all too rarely done actually. Most of the discussions you see on lead times, understandably, are talking about short lead times, but you know, if we're buying something from the other side of the world, we ain't going to get a short lead time, are we? But if we have it reliable and we can plan for it, that's the important aspect that kicks through. Okay, so those are the 4, and I would say definitely the top 4. The next ones go into things like, which I'll go through, obviously looking at the customer side of things, looking at flow and movement, concept of trade-offs, and looking at the information flows. So those are where we're headed for. But the first 4 that I've gone through, I would say, are probably prioritized as being prime ones to actually look at. Okay, so I'll just skip through the balance 4 ones a bit quickly, Justin. Number 5, well, clearly the customer is the business, isn't it? So it's the demand from the customer that's driving the whole supply chain, so that finding out what it is that the customers value and trying to deliver that is what's critical. And it may be low cost, it may be more reliability, it may be both things together. It's a different balance to be found, isn't it, with customers. And the big thing on this one, of course, is as well just who is the customer. And within that as well, I just want to drop in that there are things called internal customers, and that's taking me back into the Win the Home Games First angle there as well. So there we go. Simply, if everybody looked at the next person they passed something on to as being the customer and thought about them as that way, then things are going to change, aren't they, in the way things are going to get done. Okay, so that's a straightforward one, perhaps on customer. Number 6, it's all about movement and trying to maintain flow, isn't it? As soon as we stop the flow of goods and materials, we're generally not only increasing time, but of course we're adding cost to it. So it's all about getting the movement and keeping the movement going. Agility, those kind of words spring into mind when we talk about that one. Rule number 7, this nice idea, trade-off, looking holistically at a supply chain and deciding overall how can we get the best, which may mean paying more for transport because that reduces inventory holding. Just a very, very simple one there. I remember coming in the early 90s actually when we had a large manufacturer of confectionery products here in the UK, set up a supply chain department inside their business to coordinate things. They became known, I think it's a good title actually, they became known, not supply chain, but they became known as the Department of Trade-offs, because that's what they were doing. They were trying to look at the overall and manage that so that it broke down some of the internal silo management aspects again. And then the last one, not mentioned really in detail, but it is very important, supply chain rule number 8. It's information flows that actually lubricate the supply chain, isn't it? The big development in supply chain in the last 20, 25 years has been the growth in information and communication technology. All trade and activity that we know as supply chain has been done for many, many centuries now, certainly in the West, and it's pretty well known, but it's the ICT side that's enabled us to have visibility, enabled us to connect, etc., etc. And of course developments are still going on there. So we need to have, I'll just cop out by saying the appropriate ICT, isn't it? It needs to be something that is looked at. And I also purposely don't mind having that as last because I think we've got to always guard against the fact, I do come across it a lot in certain areas of the world where people are looking to solve problems by buying some software, and of course they'll always find someone who's willing to sell them the software. The danger is it may not be right for them. They don't understand the basic processes. They're buying something that's been programmed for them, but in 1 or 2 years' time, when things change, there are some dangers within that scenario. We really need people to understand and have some knowledge about what goes on behind the screen, and please, 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 let's use appropriate systems then to take away all the number crunching, take care of some of the simple decisions, and flag things up for people to have people's knowledge to actually use and take the right decisions. Okay, so there we go, sir.